You know, there's a particular kind of person who walks through this world feeling absolutely everything. Not just their own sorrows and joys, but everyone else's too. They're like human tuning forks, vibrating to every emotional frequency within range. We might call them sensitive souls, empaths, or simply those who feel too much. And society has trained these people rather well, hasn't it? Trained them to believe that their gift of sensitivity comes with an unspoken price. The price of being everyone's emotional sanctuary, everyone's confessor, everyone's unpaid therapist. But something rather extraordinary happens when one of these sensitive souls finally stops. Just stops. Stops absorbing everyone's moods like a sponge. Stops saying yes when every fiber of their being screams no. Stops twisting themselves into impossible shapes just to make others comfortable. What happens then is not what you'd expect. They don't become cold. They don't become cruel. They become something far more dangerous to a world built on their endless self-sacrifice. They become awake. Now, let me tell you what's really going on here, because most people completely misunderstand the nature of sensitivity. We think of the sensitive person as someone who's naturally soft, naturally giving, naturally meant to take care of others. But this is where we've gotten it all wrong. That sensitivity, that ability to feel everything, it didn't develop because these souls are meant to be the world's emotional janitors. It developed as a survival mechanism. You see, if you grew up in an environment where you had to read the room constantly, where you had to anticipate someone's mood before they walked through the door, where your safety depended on managing other people's emotions, you learned to feel everything. Not as a gift, but as armor. The sensitive child who could sense danger in a parent's tone of voice, who could feel the shift in household energy before the storm hit. That child survived by becoming exquisitely attuned to everyone else. But here's the trick. They became so good at reading others that they never learned to read themselves. And so we have these sensitive souls walking around, 30, 40, 50 years old, still operating from that childhood program, still believing that their value lies in their usefulness, still convinced that if they just give enough, care enough, sacrifice enough, they'll finally earn the love they've been seeking all along. What a magnificent con job we've pulled on these people. We've convinced them that their sensitivity is a gift they must share with everyone, all the time, regardless of the cost to themselves. We've told them that boundaries are selfish, that saying no is unkind, that taking care of themselves is somehow a betrayal of their nature. But watch what happens when one of these sensitive souls finally hits their limit. And they all do, eventually. There comes a moment, perhaps after years of giving, until they're hollow. Perhaps after one more person takes advantage of their kindness. Perhaps on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when they're sitting alone and realize they can't remember the last time anyone asked how they're really doing. In that moment, something cracks open. Not in a dramatic way, necessarily. Sometimes it's just a quiet thought, a simple question that changes everything. What if I stopped? What if I stopped trying to fix everyone? What if I stopped absorbing everyone's pain? What if I stopped being available for every crisis, real or manufactured? And in that question, there's a kind of terror, isn't there? Because the sensitive soul has built their entire identity around being needed. They don't know who they are without someone to rescue, someone to comfort, someone to save. Their whole life has been organized around this role. And the thought of stepping out of it feels like stepping into an abyss. But here's what actually happens when they dare to step into that abyss. They discover it's not an abyss at all. It's space. Open, vast, liberating space. Space to breathe. Space to think their own thoughts. Space to feel their own feelings without everyone else's emotions crowding in. And in that space, they begin to see things they couldn't see before. They see the patterns. Oh, the patterns become so clear once you stop participating in them. They see how certain people only call when they need something. They notice who disappears when they stop being the one who reaches out first. They recognize the emotional vampires, those charming people who always have a crisis, always need support, always take and never quite get around to giving back. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because the sensitive soul doesn't become cynical when they see these patterns. That's what people fear, isn't it? They fear that if they stop being so giving, so open, so endlessly compassionate, they'll turn into some hardened, bitter version of themselves. But that's not what happens. What happens is they become discerning. They develop what you might call conscious sensitivity. They can still feel deeply, still connect profoundly, still offer genuine compassion, but now they choose. They choose where to direct their energy instead of scattering it to everyone who demands it. Think about a spotlight. A sensitive soul who hasn't awakened yet is like a floodlight, illuminating everything and everyone around them while standing in their own shadow. But when they wake up, they become a spotlight, focused, intentional, powerful. They shine their light where it truly matters, where it's genuinely needed, where it will actually make a difference. And yes, this means some people get left in the dark. The people who were only there for the free illumination, who never intended to shine any light back, they suddenly find themselves without their personal sun, and they don't like it one bit. This is when you'll hear the accusations start. You've changed. You're not the person I knew. What happened to you? And the beautiful thing is, the awakened sensitive soul no longer scrambles to reassure these people. They don't rush to prove they're still good, still kind, still the same old reliable doormat. They simply smile and think, yes, I have changed. Finally. Because here's the truth that nobody talks about. The old version of the sensitive soul, the one who pleased everyone, the one who had no boundaries, the one who absorbed everyone's pain like it was their job, that version wasn't real. It was a performance, a survival strategy that got mistaken for personality. The real person was buried underneath all that compulsive caretaking. The real person had opinions they never voiced, had needs they never expressed, had anger they never released, had dreams they never pursued, because they were too busy managing everyone else's emotional weather. And when that real person finally starts to emerge, it's not comfortable. Not for the sensitive soul, and certainly not for all the people who benefited from their self-erasure. There's a period, and it can last months or even years, where everything feels strange and new and slightly terrifying. The sensitive soul has to learn skills they never developed. How to say no without a 3-paragraph explanation. How to disappoint someone without imploding from guilt. How to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate them back into the old patterns. Let me tell you about guilt. Because guilt is the primary weapon used against awakening sensitive souls. The moment they start setting boundaries, the guilt arrives like clockwork. Who do you think you are, putting yourself first? Don't you care about anyone but yourself? I thought you were a good person. And the sensitive soul, who spent their entire life proving they're good enough, feels that guilt like a knife. But here's where the real work happens. They have to sit with that guilt. They have to feel it without immediately trying to make it go away by reverting to their old patterns. They have to ask themselves the crucial question: is this guilt telling me I've actually done something wrong, or is it just the discomfort of claiming my own life? Most of the time, it's the latter. The guilt is just the death throes of the old identity. It's the part of them that learned to survive by being useful, by being needed, by being the one who fixes everything. And that part is terrified of becoming obsolete. But it must become obsolete. Because, you see, the sensitive soul cannot become who they truly are while carrying everyone else's emotional baggage. They cannot discover their authentic self while wearing the mask of the perpetual pleaser. They cannot hear their own inner voice while amplifying everyone else's needs. And so begins what I call the great sorting, Relationships that were built on the sensitive soul's endless giving start to crack. Some will evolve. The people who genuinely care, who actually see the sensitive soul as a whole person rather than a resource to be extracted, these people will adjust. They'll respect the boundaries. They'll celebrate the changes. They might even feel inspired to look at their own patterns, but others will resist. They'll push back against simply. He used to be speaking in possible house. They'll try guilt, anger, manipulation, whatever it takes to get their emotional support system back online. And this is where the sensitive soul faces their biggest test. Can they hold their ground, even when people they care about are upset with them? Can they disappoint others to stay true to themselves? This is not an easy thing. The sensitive soul has been trained since childhood to believe that other people's comfort is more important than their own authenticity. They've learned that making waves is dangerous, that standing up for themselves is selfish, that their needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. Breaking this conditioning requires something like courage. Not the dramatic kind of courage, but the quiet, everyday courage of choosing yourself when every cell in your body has been programmed to choose others. Watch what happens to the body when a sensitive soul stops people-pleasing. This is fascinating. For years, maybe decades, their body has been in a constant state of stress. Their nervous system has been processing not just their own emotions, but everyone else's too. They've had headaches, stomach problems, exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure. Their body has been screaming at them to stop, but they kept pushing through because everyone needed them. But when they finally stop, when they finally start saying no, when they finally create boundaries that protect their energy, the body begins to relax. The chronic tension starts to release. The mysterious aches and pains begin to fade. Sleep becomes deeper, energy returns. It's as if the body finally exhales after holding its breath for years. And this makes sense, doesn't it? The body was never meant to process everyone else's emotional waste. The sensitive soul has been functioning like an emotional sewage treatment plant, and their body paid the price. When they stop taking on everyone else's stress, anxiety, and pain, their physical health naturally begins to restore. Now here's something crucial to understand. When a sensitive soul awakens and starts seeing the truth, they don't lose their sensitivity. This is what people fear, and it's simply not true. They don't become numb or disconnected or cold. What happens is their sensitivity becomes conscious rather than compulsive. Before awakening, they absorbed everything automatically, like a sponge in water. They had no control over it. Someone was sad, they felt sad. Someone was anxious, they felt anxious. Someone was angry, they felt responsible for fixing it. But after awakening, something shifts. They can still sense all those emotions. Their radar is just as accurate, maybe even more so. But now there's a pause between sensing and absorbing. A moment where they can ask, is this mine or theirs? Do I want to take this on or let it pass through? They develop what you might call a selective membrane, permeable enough to remain connected, but strong enough to remain themselves. This conscious sensitivity becomes their superpower. They can walk into a room and instantly read the energy, but they're no longer knocked over by it. They can listen to someone's problems with genuine compassion, but they don't leave the conversation carrying those problems. They can love people deeply without losing themselves in the process. This is the gift that was always meant to emerge from their sensitivity. Not endless self-sacrifice, but conscious connection. Not absorption, but genuine empathy. Not drowning in everyone else's emotions, but swimming skillfully through the emotional waters of life. Let me tell you what happens in relationships when a sensitive soul awakens. It's rather remarkable. The people who were using them start to fall away naturally. There's no big confrontation, usually. Just a gradual fading as the sensitive soul stops being available for the old dynamics. The friend who only called during crises stops calling when the sensitive soul stops rushing to rescue them. The family member who demanded constant emotional support finds another target when boundaries appear. The partner who relied on the sensitive soul to manage all the emotional labor either learns to carry their own weight or looks for someone else to carry it for them. This falling away can feel like loss, and in a way it is. But it's the loss of relationships that were never really relationships at all. They were arrangements, contracts where the sensitive soul provided unlimited emotional resources in exchange for the crumbs of connection. When those contracts end, space opens up, and into that space come different kinds of people. People who see the sensitive soul as a whole person, not a resource. People who give as much as they take. People who respect boundaries instead of testing them. People who love the real person, not the performing persona. These new relationships feel different. They feel lighter somehow, even though they're deeper. There's less drama, less crisis, less exhausting emotional management. There's more ease, more reciprocity, more genuine joy. The sensitive soul discovers something astonishing. Real connection is actually restful, not draining. Love that's genuine doesn't require you to abandon yourself. True friendship means both people take care of each other, not one person doing all the caretaking. Now I want to talk about anger, because this is where things get really interesting. The awakening sensitive soul often discovers a tremendous amount of anger buried under all that compulsive niceness. Anger at being used, anger at being taken for granted, anger at all the times they said yes when they meant no, anger at the people who exploited their kindness, anger at themselves for allowing it. This anger can be shocking. The sensitive soul has spent their whole life being nice, being understanding, being patient. They've suppressed their anger so thoroughly that they forgot it was there. But it was there all along, festering under the surface, leaking out as resentment, bitterness, chronic stress. And when this anger finally surfaces, the sensitive soul often panics. They think, oh no, I'm becoming the kind of person I never wanted to be. I'm becoming angry and bitter and hard. But this is a misunderstanding. The anger isn't making them into someone new. It's revealing someone who was always there, but never had permission to exist. And this anger, when it's acknowledged and expressed appropriately, is actually healthy. It's the part of them that knows their worth. The part that refuses to be used. The part that says, no, enough, I matter too. The anger is not their enemy, it's their teacher. It shows them exactly where their boundaries were violated. It gives them the energy to establish new ones. It burns away the false self and reveals the real one underneath. But the sensitive soul has to learn to work with this anger skillfully. Not to explode at everyone who ever wronged them. Not to become bitter and suspicious of all human connection. But to use the anger as information, as fuel for change, as the fire that transforms them from pleaser to person. Here's something beautiful that happens. As the sensitive soul heals, as they learn to honor their own needs and set healthy boundaries, they often find themselves wanting to help others do the same. But the way they help is completely different now. Before they helped by doing everything for people, by absorbing their pain, by fixing their problems. They helped from a place of compulsion and codependency. Now they help by holding space. By believing in people's ability to solve their own problems, by sharing what they've learned, without trying to save anyone, they become what you might call a conscious guide rather than a compulsive rescuer. And this actually helps people far more than the old way ever did. Because when you rescue people, you reinforce their helplessness. But when you believe in their capacity to figure things out, You help them find their own strength. The awakened sensitive soul understands that the greatest gift they can give others is not to do things for them, but to trust them to do things for themselves. Let me tell you about something I call the return to self. After the initial awakening, after the boundaries are set, after some relationships end and others transform, there's a period where the sensitive soul has to learn to be alone with themselves. Really alone. Not lonely, but in solitude. For the first time in their life. There's no one they're trying to please, no one whose emotions they're managing, no one they're performing for. Just them. And this can be uncomfortable at first, because without all that external noise, they have to face their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own desires. They have to ask themselves questions they've been avoiding. What do I actually want? What do I actually think? Who am I when I'm not being useful to someone? These questions can feel terrifying, because the sensitive soul has spent so long defining themselves through others that they don't quite know who they are on their own. But this is where the real treasure lies. In that solitude, in that space where they're not performing or pleasing or fixing, they begin to meet themselves for the first time. They discover their own preferences, their own opinions, their own quirks. They find out what makes them laugh when no one's watching, what moves them when there's no one to impress, what lights them up when there's no one to please. They discover that they're interesting, that they have depths they never had time to plunge, that they're actually quite good company. And something wonderful happens. The sensitive soul falls in love, not with someone else, but with themselves. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a gentle, appreciative way. They start to see themselves as worthy of the same care and attention they've always given others. They start treating themselves with the same compassion they've extended to everyone else. They start honoring their own needs with the same dedication they brought to everyone else's. This self-love is revolutionary, because once you genuinely love yourself, you can no longer accept relationships that require you to abandon yourself. Once you know your own worth, you can no longer settle for breadcrumbs of affection. Once you've tasted the peace of being alone with yourself, you can no longer tolerate connections that create chaos. The sensitive soul who has awakened and returned to themselves becomes unshakable in a way they never were before. Not because they've hardened their heart, but because they've finally found their center. And from that center, they engage with the world in a completely new way. They give from overflow rather than depletion. They help from inspiration rather than obligation. They love from wholeness rather than neediness. They connect from authenticity rather than performance. This is what I call sovereign sensitivity, the ability to feel everything while remaining yourself, the capacity to care deeply without losing yourself, the gift of being both open and boundaried, both soft and strong. And here's the beautiful paradox. When the sensitive soul stops trying to please everyone, when they stop absorbing everyone's emotions, when they finally put themselves first, they actually become more effective at helping others, not less, more. Because they're no longer helping from woundedness. They're helping from wholeness. They're not rescuing people to feel valuable. They're supporting people because it genuinely moves them. They're not fixing problems to avoid their own. They're sharing wisdom they've earned through their own healing. The awakened sensitive soul becomes a kind of lighthouse. They stand on solid ground, shining their light steadily, illuminating the path for those who are ready to see. But they don't chase ships in the fog. They don't abandon their post to rescue every vessel in distress. They trust that their steady light is enough, that those who are meant to find their way will find it. This is true service, not self-sacrifice, but self-offering. Not depletion, but contribution. Not martyrdom, but mastery. So what happens when a sensitive soul stops pleasing everyone and starts seeing the truth? They don't become less. They become more authentically themselves, more genuinely connected, more powerfully present, more radiantly alive. The true self that was always there, buried under all that people-pleasing, finally emerges. And it turns out that true self is magnificent, not because it's perfect or enlightened or beyond all human struggle, but because it's real, beautifully, messily, courageously real. And in a world full of masks and performances, that realness is the most precious thing of all.